Since we are in quite cozy setting, please do interrupt me at any time with thoughts or ideas or questions or whatever comes to your mind, and let's try and keep it lively. I would like to talk about how culture matters, and maybe a good heading for the topic that I want to speak on for this hour is what's happening with the world. 10 years ago, the situation was 2005. Europe was enlarging, the American economy grew, the world economy grew. It looked like the weather today, blue sky without any clouds. 10 years later, we're not sure about the future of the European Union. Donald Trump is talking of building walls again. It seems as if the Western culture is tired of being the good guy, possibly, maybe. We don't know what to do with our values. We are learning that it is mainly culture that actually predetermines the future. The Greek debate was mainly a theological debate, whether it's just to forgive debts. And yet, on the other hand, the economy itself is becoming more and more important part of our cultural understanding. Perhaps we live in the most ideological age of all. Many philosophers call our age the post-ideological age. But then again, one could look at it differently and say, well, isn't this the most ideological time of all? Because, our parents, when they went to church, they would repeat to themselves what it is that they believe. They had an arm's length from their beliefs. So, I believe in God, the Father, and this and that. And those are my beliefs. They are beliefs. They were cognitively reminding themselves every week that these are our beliefs, and they are beliefs. We must be careful about that. Today, we no longer believe, we know. Which is, of course, the home run of any ideology, is to pretend like there is no alternative and no option. So let me start with the four crises that have hit Europe and the West. Financial crisis, Ukrainian crisis, Greek crisis, and now the refugee crisis. And all of that seems to threaten Europe with becoming somewhat violent, at least in rhetorics, somewhat careful, somewhat puzzled with its own self. When I'm asked about the refugee crisis, I often say to my friends, enjoy the time, because we're seeing for the first time, I think, in history, Germany being uncertain. Even Germans don't know what to do. They always knew. For better or for worse, there was always a clear direction for Europe, especially in the last decade or so, when Germany really took the lead. Just imagine how Europe would look like without Angela Merkel. There isn't really any leader of any sorts in sight. All others, starting with Hollande, ending with Cameron, are leaders who only care about their own constituency. They really do not have a larger vision. So let's have a look at culture, economics, and violence. So, of course, the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of culture, economics, and violence could possibly be the 20s and the 30s of the last century, when there was a big economic crisis in the United States of America. So it would be maybe useful to compare that a little bit, because there are similarities. Please mark that both of these crises started in the United States of America. They caused much more havoc in the United States of America in terms of more unemployment and more jobless people, and also, of course, the safety net in the United States isn't as generous as we are used to here in Europe. So a personal tragedy is much more tragic than a personal tragedy in Europe. Yet, the crises didn't lead to civil war or any war in America. The Americans somehow managed to keep the economic crises within an implosion chamber. So the explosion didn't spread to other areas of life. So unlike Europe, when the big crisis of 20s and 30s touched Europe, we actually started fighting each other. So in other words, it isn't really the economy in the last century that was enough to trigger such onset of violence. That crisis had to meet with European demons that come from history to make us turn up against each other. Also mark how the Americans reflected the crises. Nobody came up with the idea that it would be great to tear America apart. Just, there never was a good idea to join the North and the South. We should have kept separate, and it's better if we have walls to control migration within the United States of America. So Americans, when they were hit with the financial crises, both in the last century and today, they never had self-inflicting thoughts of sort of attacking one another, whereas we Europeans did back in the 30s, but also today, of course. The outrage of violence, thank God, is nothing compared to what we saw during the Second World War, but the rhetorics are definitely going in that direction. We have leaders almost in every country. The extreme right is getting more and more votes and seats and influence, and we've been afraid of Greece leaving the Eurozone. We are now afraid. We have 2 weeks and counting to see the British referendum. And you know that other countries are sort of flirting with that idea of sort of going back to a state that was unstable, but at least it was something that we feel worked. Now, of course, for example, the refugee crisis is only a problem because we have the New Testament. If it wouldn't been for the New Testament, there wouldn't be a problem. Just, shoot them. They're not our people. We feel that they could threaten us, and we have no obligation to help them. It is from the New Testament where the problem comes, so to speak. So one way how to read the refugee crisis is that the neighbor whom we are obliged to love is too neighborly. It's always better when the neighbor is the object of your love. Should be kept not so close in your face. Also, this is one way to read globalization. The distance is too near. I have everything, the whole world. There is a little thunder in northern Japan, and the second Japanese people know about it, I know about it. The distance is too close. We are now worried with the worries of the whole world, so to speak. And this, of course, makes it absolutely crucial to examine the ideology under which we live. It is that ideology, that culture, that I think is turning from traditional values to economic values. This is, I think, the problem. Not that we Europeans or the Westerners don't have values. That's not the problem. I think the problem is that our values are becoming more and more economic, and I'll try to demonstrate that. But the most fundamental problem is in this confusion of beliefs. Do we believe in capitalism, or do we believe in growth capitalism? Because capitalism, for me, when we had this revolution here 26 years ago, 1989, I'm the last generation that still remembers the revolution. My brother, who is 4 years younger, has no memory of it. But there I believe that democracy and capitalism basically means a set of freedoms. that you can speak your mind, that you can travel, that you can do whatever you want to do, and that you're responsible primarily for your own life in areas where it doesn't influence other people. That, to me, is to believe in capitalism or market democracy, as we call it. So my belief, and I think this was quite a common belief, was that market democracy is the most fertile ground for growth of arts, spirits, and also of the economy. Because the economic growth, unlike growth in culture, can be numbered and numeralized and counted to the last penny, I think this is the reason why we have fetishized this one area of growth and completely forget about other areas. Also note that the whole idea of Czech transition, for those of you who are Czech, which I think is a minority, which is good for you, we read, whenever somebody said transformation from communism to capitalism, it was mainly and primarily and dominantly an economic transformation. Little bit like the European integration. At the end of the day, when you speak of European integration, it's sort of economic integration. You could see this nicely in Brussels. Brussels becoming the synonym for European integration and also a synonym of European disintegration. I speak now of Molenbeek and other. So it's symbolic that the same town becomes symbol for both. Even the 4 economic freedoms that we have in European Union are, at the end of the day, economic freedoms. The freedom of movements of persons is rather the freedom of movement of work, labor, the movement of capital and all that. So what we have done is we have, I would say, put all our ideology of European friendship and integration, we have, so to speak, we didn't do ideological diversification very well. We've put all the eggs of European integration into one basket, and that is the basket of economy. So when the economy is doing well, we feel that Europe is doing well, that European integration is doing well. And the moment that starts faltering, we feel that European integration has disappointed us. Again, compare this with the behavior in the United States of America. The United States of America was founded for different reasons than economic cooperation. The main idea of European, so when the economy goes down a little bit in America, it doesn't mean the whole idea of United States of America is necessarily bad, because there are other reasons why Americans believe in the culture of rather being together than being separate. In Europe, although we feel that Europeans are more, happiness of life and culture oriented, I would say that it is us Europeans who react to the economic fluctuations more hysterically than any other culture that we know of. So that's the whole culture of capitalism, in a way, gets questioned in Europe, not so much in America, because it doesn't grow. Now, coming back to the story that I started from communism, when we had this revolution, we believed that market democracy is the most fertile ground for growth. Today, I think we believe similar thing, but exactly opposite. This is something that happens very frequently in philosophy and in mythology and in our fairy tales, a subject-object reversal, when the master-slave relationship gets perversed. So we used to believe market democracy, fertile ground for growth. If it comes, good. If it doesn't come, doesn't really threaten the system. Today, we believe that growth is a conditio sine qua non of market democracy, which is a completely different belief. The first belief is believe in capitalism, and whether it pays or doesn't pay isn't so important. The second belief is a belief that we need growth, and if we don't get growth, the economy crumbles, If we don't get growth, democracies crumble, as you can see. Leaders that are not really fascinated with democracy are getting more and more popular in Europe and also in America. So isn't maybe this the problem, that we have swapped the priorities? This subject-object reversal, when the master-slave relationship becomes swapped, is something that you see very often in culture, as I said. So, for example, I don't know, Matrix. You've seen Matrix, I suppose, all of you. The basic story there is that we human beings created something that was supposed to slave for us, artificial intelligence and machines. Then something happened, a black box of a subject-object reversal, the master-slave reversal, and we human beings became slaves of robots, being only there to provide them with some energy. You can see this nicely also in the beautiful writings of Milan Kundera, perhaps the most famous Czech author as of now. And most of his stories are based on this basic idea that somebody starts a game of sexual nature or makes a joke, and then that game somehow gets life of its own, will of its own, intent of its own, and that game starts playing the player. If we believe that market democracy is more valuable than growth, we are fine. If we believe we need growth so that we Europeans remain Europeans, if we need growth so that American culture remains American culture, if we need to be bribed by growth, then vote to us. Then in that case, Greece isn't behind the civilized world, going bankrupt because they're lagging. But Greece is, as always in history, ahead of us, merely bankrupting 20 years before everybody else. There's a beautiful story in the Bible, in the first book of Moses. This is the first business cycle in the history of the world, completely embedded in religious culture, but today we don't read it that way. And Pharaoh has a dream about 7 fat cows and 7 lean cows. I'm sure you know the story. And he doesn't know what this dream means, so he calls Joseph, and Joseph says, well, congratulations, Pharaoh. You have just had the first macroeconomic prediction in the history of the world. You have seen a macroeconomic forecast, 5 years of growth. Today we would say GDP growth, but back in the day, the economy actually meant growth of crops. So 7 years of plenty will be followed by 7 lean years in which famine will take place. So Pharaoh asks Joseph, well, that's very good to know. What should I do with it? And Joseph says, in the good years, do not eat everything that grows. Do not consume everything that grows, but save. So that in the bad years, you will not die from hunger. So in other words, Joseph, because he was a well-read Keynesian, he suggested to Pharaoh to decrease the amplitude of a business cycle. Since time immemorial, the economy has been going up and down, up and down. We call it business cycle. If we will want the economy to produce growth results every year, and if it doesn't, then we feel that we are morally wrong and something needs to change or something needs to be broken, like we here feel in Europe, then it's like a situation where we are expecting good weather every day. If you live your life expecting every day will be a sunshine day, you will have a very depressed life. It's like I have nothing against growth, but growth to me is a secondary, tertiary, or maybe priority number 6. We have more important priorities to take care of. It's like when you buy a car, the only thing that you would focus on would be the top speed. That's, you also need to know other things about the car. So it's like maybe I have nothing against growth, like I have nothing against good weather. It's just that expecting that every year, every quarter, every month, we will have positive GDP results. That's the situation where you believe that every day should be a happy day. And if not, there's something wrong with you. You need to change. It's very naive. And again, it's something that we have embedded in our ideology in this rigorous field of economics. At the heart of this rigorous mathematical field is this belief that the economy should grow every year. Where this belief came from, God knows. I always ask my friends, did you have a prophetic dream about the economy having to grow every year? Is it written in the Bible somewhere? Do you see it in the clouds? Do you see it in a crystal ball? Why do you assume that the economy should grow? Did you see it anywhere in the history? It's always been going up and down. So that's that belief, and it's a belief that coexists in our scientific, ideology-free brains in the middle of the whole superstructure. So from the distance, it looks like objective mathematical field, but inside, it's pure ideology. Believing, and again, I stress the word believing that the economy should grow every year is like building a ship under the assumption that every day good weather conditions will prevail. That's not a good ship. And we have based our pension system, we have based our banking, we have based our social system, we've based our budget always on the assumption that in the long run, GDP will grow, which I don't know where we took this belief from. So this is the important part about culture. Which one do we believe? And this is serious because it seems a little bit abstract, but it's very, very practical. My teachers always said there is nothing more practical than a good theory. I don't hear this anymore, but 2 years ago, when I was traveling and debating with our colleagues, there was this fascination with China. And sometimes I would get a very serious business person ask a question, say, look at China. Shouldn't we maybe go down a little bit on our ridiculous labor protection and ridiculous ecological, laws and go a little bit down with democracy, make the system a little bit more totalitarian in order to grow like China? So there you already see how dangerous the subject-object swap is. Because my question was, really, you want to give up democracy so that our GDP grows for 20%? Are you seriously serious? It's also one of the more depressing questions that I have for you, and it again comes back to culture. If communist regime would be able to grow 5% GDP every year, would it ever fall? Because here we are exactly at the scale. Would we be willing to sacrifice occasional political imprisonment? Would we be willing to sacrifice our ability to speak freely? Would we be willing to sacrifice our, high ecological standards or labor protection standards or all that we've built in all these years? Are we even ready to sacrifice the European integration, believing that we will have higher growth without it, which even isn't certain? Then our Western culture is in deep trouble. So that's my point number one. My point number two, question number two, is what's happening to our values? And I will try to argue or offer a hypothesis that our values are becoming economic values. So, for example, do you know which is the most broken commandment from all the 10 commandments? Let's take some old, values that we in the West all know about and that our forefathers lived by for millennia. Which one do you think is the most broken commandment from the 10? It's not the 7th. I hear that many of you are studied psychologists, so everybody reacts to. You shall keep the Sabbath day holy. Fourth commandment, by the way, which means it's the first one from, that the commandments are broken down to three sort of theological ones, hard to measure, love thy God with all your heart. So that's sort of difficult to measure. And then there are 7 practical ones. And the first of the 7, which could mean that it's most important, but we never know, is the Shabbat commandment, which is primarily an economic commandment. In other words, you will not work all the time. You will not change reality all the time. But now, and this is my point, we take, and this is something that I think comes from your field as well, from HR, we take rest in a different way than our forefathers. We take rest as a subset of working better. It is, if that would be the case, then God would have rested on Wednesday. Being tired from his labor and, running out of ideas maybe. I'll take a break. So, Wednesday, everybody take a break so that Thursday you are, bon vivant again and you're ready for work. In the Old Testament meaning, the word rest was when the job is done, when you've finished. Not as if God had another multiverse to work on Monday morning. I had a friend of mine, and when we met each other, like you normally ask, what's your name, where do you come from, what do you do? So I asked him, what do you do? And he said, nothing, I'm done. And I sort of liked that. So you see that we still have a value of rest, but the cultural, ideological reason for rest has changed. Rest isn't a joy in completing one's work, but rest is a subset of, as I said, working better and harder. And this, of course, comes down back to economics. And let me now go to Japan. Anybody from Japan? But not here. They took a rest. Rest in the room. Restroom. Japanese have been trying to grow the economy, to jumpstart the economy for 20, 30 years now. Japan is a good example because if you take all the advice that you get from the OECD and the World Bank and all the think tanks that we have from IMF and the central banks and God knows what, if you would force me to summarize all the advice that we as a West are getting from these people, basically it says be more like Japan. Work harder, invest in infrastructure, have faster highways, railways, be more work devoted, study harder, and don't care so much about your personal life. The irony, of course, of the whole situation is that Japan doesn't grow for a generation and a half. 2 points to take from there. Even if we had all that as economically streamlined as in Japan, meaning 2 days of holiday in 10 years, even if we would be as efficient and as hard-working as the Japanese, in Japan they have this word karoshi, which is a death from overwork. People die, it's a legal term, the wife always gets some extra pension if her husband dies working. The irony there is that I would understand that the breadwinner puts down his or her life because his children or her children are starving to death, and I sacrifice myself. But this is exactly the other situation. They overwork not because they lack in wealth, but Japan, is much per capita. Japan is much richer than the United States of America, and the United States of America per capita, again, richer than Europe. And yet, it is in Japan that they really work a lot. One of the explanations that we get why Japan cannot grow is this golden ceiling argument that you've heard. Everybody already has 2 iPods. Nobody wants a third one, even for free, because we only have 2 hands. What fascinates me about this argumentation, whether I believe it or not, it's now unimportant. I again look for the second derivative of the argumentation, is why do we read this as bad news? Isn't this a home run of the economy? Everybody has 2 iPods. That means you don't have to work so much. So again, what is the meaning, what's the purpose of economy? What's the telos? For those of you who do philosophy, you know that Aristotle talks of telos as in the meaning of life. What's the meaning, what's the Shabbat of economy? Is the point of the economy to grow constantly? Or is it to make us wealthy? Because wealthy we are. If, for example, if you ask me, is it a good pen or is it a bad pen? I would open it and I would write down something and I would say, oh, it's a good pen because it writes, or bad pen because it doesn't write. To answer the question whether it's a good pen or a bad pen is easy because intuitively everybody understands what's the telos of a pen. And the telos of a pen is to write. Now, if I ask you the same question, does capitalism perform well or not? How would you answer? It's more difficult because we don't know what is the meaning of capitalism. Is it only to make us wealthy? Or is it other things as well? Because sometimes I feel we have these little bit unrealistic expectations from capitalism. We sometimes expect it to give us work-life balance. We sometimes expect capitalism to take care of our old parents. We expect capitalism to take care of the weak. We expect capitalism to settle wars. But we have to do that. We have to take care of our old people. We have to take care of the sick. We have to take care of the weak exactly because we believe in that. The economy cannot be expected to do that. If you expect the economy to do that, you will be as disappointed as expecting this pen. So let's say that I'm not very clever and that I have confusion about what's the meaning of pen, and I would expect it to fry my eggs, for example. So every morning, I put the raw egg on it and I would be cursing the pen for yet again failing to fry my egg. Now, let's stop and pause whether we're not suffering from a similar problem when it comes to capitalism. Because it did make us rich. So what's the home run of capitalism? What's the Shabbat? When are we done? And when can we finally devote our attention to other things than getting wealthier every year? And again, the explanation that Japan cannot grow because it hit its the golden roof, that's bad news for growth capitalism because it cannot grow. But it's good news, it's a home run for capitalism in one way. This is what John Maynard Keynes talks about in one of his late speeches called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. He says, not in my lifetime, not in yours, but in the lifetime of our grandchildren, let's say 100 years from now, which is going to be 100 years in 10 years. 100 years from now, he writes in 30s, mankind will become so affluent, economists will no longer be priests showing us the way forward as they are today, but they will be maintenance personnel. In other words, the building is already built, you no longer need an architect, you just need a maintenance guy if there is a leaking pipe. And then John Maynard Keynes starts a very interesting discourse. He says, when humankind, for the first time in their history, will be affluent enough, a new Adam will be born. So John Maynard Keynes is using extremely strong religious language because you know that this is something that Jesus Christ referred to himself, I'm the new Adam. And Keynes says, the morality of mankind will change, our culture will change, and we'll no longer care for the economic, but we will finally do what's most valuable for us. Friendship, art, family, whatever it is that we feel is important in life. If we have basic confusion in these cultural matters, which are in a way religious, then that really predetermines what's going to happen. If all of us believe that it's okay for the economy to go up and down, this would not have a reflection in us trying to elect leaders that use violence and aggression. So let me share two more thoughts, and then let's open for debate, because we're running a little bit out of time. There is a parable. I invent parables. This is what I learned from New Testament. The best way to speak is to speak in parables. So there's a parable of the cow. This is my parable. I made it up, so I can make rules there. And there's a cowboy or cowgirl. We have to speak gender neutrally these days. Is milking a gender neutral cow. And as she or he is milking it, the cow runs out of milk. And the cow person starts hitting the cow and saying, "You are a bad cow. How dare you not give me more milk? I need more milk for my children, from my parents, from my unemployed, whatever. I need more milk." And then, and this is the advantage when you invent your own parables, cows can speak in it. So she opens her mouth and she tells the cow person, "But I've already given you all my milk. And I've given you a lot of milk. And you don't even know how much milk I've given you. So let me tell you, I gave you today 12 baskets of milk. One of them is rotting. The other one has a dent in it. The third one you've tilted over. The fourth and fifth one, you don't even know where you put it. The sixth one you drank alone when nobody was watching. And you are blaming me for not giving you enough milk." Now, what if this could be a parable about the economy, in our case, capitalism? It's also nice because we can measure new milk. That's called GDP. But we can't really measure how much we have. That's a statistic that we actually don't use. So when you ask about somebody, okay, how rich are the Swiss? A typical person would answer to you, well, their GDP per capita is this and that. In other words, what they make in a year. But we don't know how much milk we actually have. This is, I think, the fundamental problem. If we expect this cow, and we blame the cow for every problem that we have in that little farm, then we will kill the cow because we are disappointed that it doesn't give us every year more and more milk. Let me give you two more examples how culture and economy is embedded. GDP, the crown figure of all economics, is appearing like a hard number that's objective and factual, and there's nothing you can doubt about it. That's why we still have it, because all other measurements are softer, not as strictly clear as GDP. So although it appears as an absolute objective fact, I will try to show that it's 120% culture laden. Why? Well, because GDP is a remnant of nationalism. Ulrich Beck, a wonderful German sociologist and philosopher who passed away last year, had this great observation. GDP is a remnant of nationalism. Well, what do you mean? Well, we still measure it in national terms to start with. We could have measured our wealth in the color of hair. So redheads, the wealth of redheads, the GDP of redheads is going up. Blondes, not so good. And the brunettes this year, very, very bad. Or we could also measure it in terms of gender. The GDP of males versus females, unlike the GDP of Czech Republic versus Germany. And if we measured it in gender terms, for example, or we could measure it regionally. If we measured our wealth regionally, then the debate between Germany and Greece would never succumb to the Second World War discourse. The reason why there was so much Second World War components of 2016 debate over Greece was because the ideology was still in national terms. If we measured it regionally, there would be surely some Greek regions that would be supporting some poorer, especially Eastern German regions. But because we chose to measure the same measure, the debate was nationalistic. So if we measured GDP according to gender, this is how our newspapers would look like. So in the year 2015, the GDP of women went up by 4.2, while the GDP of, always lazy, males went down by 2.4%. Now what shall we do? Will the women be again fiscally solidary with these lazy males? What sort of new legal incentives should we have so that these males work harder and catch up with women? That would be the discourse. That would be the debate. Only because we have, for historic reasons, settled with counting GDP in national terms, do we try to solve the problem in national terms, and the remnants from the past are echoing through the structures of the matrix with which we see. So one last thought. One would think that the role of a brewery, when in Greece, speak like the Greeks do, when in Czech Republic, speak about beer. So sort of the intuitive way of reading what is the role of breweries, one would say, well, the role of breweries is to sell beer. That seems pretty obvious. Well, I would say that it's more precise to say that the role of breweries is to harvest beer culture. In a country where there is no beer culture, you can do whatever you want. You're not going to be able to sell a single bottle of beer. If businesses start understanding this, that we are harvesting beer culture, then intuitively we also understand that we are responsible for this culture, not to overbraze it, for example. So it is in the interest of breweries to make sure that people actually don't drink too much of it. So if you pass by Prague, you will see that it's very interesting. There's an advertisement for beer, drink beer, drink beer, drink beer, but then there is a small little, but not too much. So it's like this love and hate thing. So the last thought is, during the communist regime, we also had crises. In economics, we read everything in supply and demand. So during communism, we wanted cheese, but we didn't have any. We wanted sugar, but they were running out of sugar. We wanted cars, but it took 2 years to wait for one. So in other words, the demand was okay, the hunger was present, the hunger was strong and functional, but the supply chain kept malfunctioning and faltering, so to speak. Fast forward 20 plus years to today, and we also have crisis of the economy, but exactly from the other angle. We know how to produce cars. We have plenty of cars. We have plenty of sugar. You can find 12 different types of razor blades within the 5-minute radius from here. So the supply works fine, but the demand doesn't. Nobody wants so much sugar. There's too many cars. Too many types of razor blades. So in the first example, you can picture a group of hungry people sitting around a table where there is not enough food. And that was the crisis of economy then. Today, the situation is completely opposite. The table is full of all kinds of marvelous things, from water from Fiji in Europe, but nobody's hungry. So the economy cooks more than it wants to eat. What surprises me that we are trying to find a way out of this conundrum by cooking more and more efficiently. Thank you for your attention, and let's go into debate. You can, of course, ask about anything that interests you. You can also ask, we make an exception, you can also ask about things that don't interest you. Please.
I'll make one comment and then
Please.
ask a question. So the crisis as far as violence in America right now is the have versus the have-nots. So that's my comment on that. But so I'm not sure I'm clear on your definition of wealth.
Right. Nobody's clear about on the definition of wealth. We have never defined that. If we would have had that, then we could have said, well, this is the home run of economy, and once we have that done, then we can focus on other things. Well, I would say if the majority of people, vast majority of people, can take their kids twice a month to see movies without being worried that they'll have nothing to eat at the end of the month, we're okay. It's not a very good definition. You can pick 10,000 others, but let's just, for the moment, have this. It's also interesting that one of the prophecies of Jesus, which is in theology not considered to be prophecy, but one that really came true, is his thing about poor you will have with you always. Remember, Judas comes to Jesus and said, the money that was wasted on your feet, washing your feet, could have been saved for the poor. And Jesus makes a prophecy, which hasn't been noticed by theologians as a prophecy, but it is a prophecy. It's talking about the future. You will have poor with you always. And this prophecy, you can tick off. So, of course, you will always have relative poverty. But the question is, can we say enough? In other words, my hypothesis is that the word enough will never come from outside. The word enough has to come from within. Interestingly, if I may, one more story where you see how culture is very extremely linked with economy is our Greek heritage and is our Hebrew heritage. The Garden of Eden was very nice. Adam never worked in paradise. The Catholic medieval interpretation of the original sin is somehow connected with sex, for reasons unknown. You know that Jesus was begun in an immaculate way, meaning that all rest of us were begun in an immaculate way. So this is the curse of the original sin. Where it came from, I don't really know. I'm asking theologians and they don't know either. Because there isn't anything about sex in the first books of Moses. What there is, however, the word consume repeats 22 times over the span of one page. Go home, borrow a Bible from your grandmother, and read the story very carefully and try not to read it as a religious story, but try to read it in economic terms. 22 times the word consume, don't consume, they consume, she gave in to consume, was nice to see, to blah, 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 consume, 22 times on one page. If you ask me, that's very poor literature. You're not supposed to repeat the same word 22 times over the span of one page. Unless, of course, you have a point. So I could say that the original sin was, in a way, a sin of consumer nature, because they consumed it. Sola scriptura. And it was a sin even of overconsumption. In other words, my question is, what I did a nice research, exactly following your very crucial question. Will mankind ever have enough? Or will we always have poor with us, relatively poor? Of course, our poor today are much richer than the kings of medieval times, but hard to explain that today. So I did a research in all ideas of heaven that we have in our culture. And my question was, how do people behave in a situation of economic plenty? Will they have enough? So I don't have time to go through that, but I went through all the Greek myths and even the modern myths from Lord of the Rings, for example. There also, even the elves in Rivendell are not happy. Star Wars would never really function if it was called Star Peace. I don't think it would get 7 sequels. Human beings in the situation of plenty. So in the Garden of Eden, there was plenty of things to eat, ecological balance. These people were still within a warranty, so to speak. They didn't have any psychological things, and they were perfect. Everything that was created good. So my question is, as an economist, how do people behave in a situation where they actually have enough? Will they be able to rest? And from the story of Eden, you can see that even in the perfect context, people they could talk with the divinity as I'm talking to you. There was only one woman. Just imagine how that simplifies things. On the whole world, just one male, one female gets you rid of a lot of dilemmas. And yet people were not happy. And even if you want to, you can even read the curse that Adam and Eve receives in economic nature also. Eve gets the curse of demand. You will desire. No, you can say it even this way. Because everything I gave you wasn't enough, nothing will be enough. You will desire, but your desires will not be with you. Your desires will be disjointed. They will be somewhere else. You will not be in control of your desires. Your desires will, in fact, be in control of you. This is the desire that Eve gets. Adam, on the other hand, gets the curse of supply. You will work in the sweat of your brow. And even with the technology of the 21st century, electricity and Wi-Fi and hotspots and internet and artificial intelligence, all your hard work will not be enough. So, this is a story that is, 3,000 almost years old, but it functions, we still relate to it. Sallust, a pre-Socratic philosopher, said a wonderful thing. Myth is something that never happened, but it's happening always. And in that way, our beliefs are exactly so. If Adam and Eve were not able to be content in a great context, and you can find this in other stories. I'm just using this one because I think this is a story that everybody knows and relates to most frequently. The Greek myths are not so well known. Then we have a problem. Also, all the wizards, all the religious leaders, all the philosophers were always trying to say, be content with what you have. You know the song, whatever Lola wants, Lola gets. You know the song, yeah, from 20s. Wouldn't it be better if whatever Lola has, Lola wants? We have this sort of thing that we want things that we don't have. Once you get it, you don't sort of crave for it anymore. And another way to answer this thing is, and maybe a little bit of hope, the Greek debate between the hedonist and the Stoa. Hedonists were basically saying, well, human condition is thus. I desire this, my wants and my wishes and my needs or whatever are here. My supply, again, demand and supply. I demand here, my supply is here. So what you should do, and this is a program that we in the West have been following for 2,000 years, increase the supply until you have everything that you want. That's basically increasing GDP. We spend 40 hours a week doing it. No wonder it grows at times. So that's the program that we have in our heads. The only way how to be content is to have more. Stoa, on the other hand, said, we agree with the initial condition. A man desires this and has this. But our solution is, if this is the problem, then do this. And you will end up a content person, either here or here. The problem with the hedonist program was that this is non-stationary. And the mistake they made is a non-trivial one. They thought, like many of us today think, that desire, the basic desire of desire is to be content, is to be fulfilled. But no. Desire's primary motive and driving engine is not to be content, but to be multiplied. We desire new and better desires once we have accomplished the old ones. So this isn't really a stationary point, because the more we have, not the less we desire, but the more we desire. 20 years ago, before this, did you need more things or did you need less things? Less. Also, by the way, do you know what was the original promise of this, of computers and cell phones? Why did we get hooked? The original promise, if you remember, was you will have more time, right? So, either we as mankind will be able to work on our being content, and then I have optimistic vision for the future, or we will not, and then we will choke on our own growth, like Greece. I felt there was a question there. Oh, no.
Very brilliant.
Thank you.
I'm frustrated because there are two words I didn't hear from you.
I'm training to be a Jedi, you know.
In the relationship between culture and economy.
Yeah.
Unemployment and progress.
Oh, perfect.
Unemployment is a cultural disaster.
Yeah.
I mean, strong unemployment. How can we ensure employment with
Yep.
growth? I don't think Japan is a rule or benchmark. I think it's an exception, but it's my belief.
Sure.
The second word I didn't hear is progress. I mean, technical progress. Can we progress without growth?
Thank you. Unemployment. Unemployment is a modern phenomenon. In the agriculture societies, this was non-existent. Let me try and answer in a different way. You know Cinderella? The story of Cinderella? She had to work. Her problem was that she was too efficient. Yeah. So her stepmother, made her clean the whole apartment, and she was done. And then she wanted to go party, and she said, "No! You have to work more." And she says, "There's nothing more to work." And then she took peas and beans, mixed them on the floor, and created artificial work for Cinderella to work. Now, my question, again, looking at your absolutely crucial question here from a little bit of a philosophical standpoint, isn't it also true that the question that worries you in the same way that it worries me and everybody else in this room, that we have unemployment not because we are not producing enough? That's not the worry. We don't want to have full employment because we need to have something done, like a ship, or let's imagine the planet is hitting, there's the asteroid hitting the planet, and we need to complete this ship really, really quickly, and that's why we can't afford to have low unemployment. Everybody has to be. No, this is not the way we think about unemployment. We think about unemployment just so that people have something to do. And this is exactly the story of Cinderella. You have to do this to stay out of the trouble and not party with the prince. So my question is, and this is a fundamental question for you, how much work or how much argumentation for work is Cinderella type of economy? Another question is, you know that entertainment industry is becoming more and more dominant part of the economy. It employs the best of our... Oh my God. Is that a signal?
It's a sign.
It's a sign. Oh, it's a PowerPoint time. Must be. This is progress. So we think of unemployment as being a problem exactly because people will have nothing to do. So we would even, I think, prefer artificial labor than something. So this entertainment industry is an extremely interesting example. We have entertainment industry. We have industry that creates entertainment, meaning we're bored. We have the best of brains working on it, and the problem is that the entertainment industry isn't even entertaining anymore. But what's interesting there is that what we lack is, in a way, lack itself. That's why we watch these movies, because in these movies, there's usually somebody who's suffering from hunger or cold, or is threatened on life by somebody. You can only watch a movie like that when you are home, safe, warm, and popcorn in your mouth. Yeah? When you're hungry yourself, you don't watch a movie about hunger. So this, in a way, is something that, to me, answers the question of artificial sort of employment. Point number 2, with the advent of artificial intelligence, you know that there's this huge debate about this guaranteed income, which would primarily take care of the poor. So I somewhat like the idea. I'm not buying it completely, but I think maybe in 50 years there will be a good time for this. But when I'm having a debate, this is a Swiss idea. They just had a referendum there a couple of days back, last Sunday actually, 4 days ago. So when the originators of the idea came to consult this with me, I was like, I'm not really sure, but if you want to take care of the poor, which is nice, then maybe we should take care of the really poor, not the Swiss poor. And I would really like for our solidarity to extend beyond the national borders. Here I'm coming back again to this idea of nation. It is absolutely natural for South Bohemia to support Northern Bohemia, like it is natural for American states to do fiscal transfers between each other all the time. Nobody even notices, because Americans don't have a problem helping other Americans. Czechs don't have a problem helping other Czechs. Czechs have a problem helping Greeks because they are not us. I would love to live in a world where we would have the social network, the solidarity network that we have in every country, France, Czech Republic, Germany, actually expand to the whole world. And in that sense, the minimum guaranteed income would be interesting. And just think how the whole investment structure and the flows of money would change if suddenly there would be guaranteed some decent income for poor children in India. It's much easier to make them happy than it is to make a European child happy. So, yeah, this would be again saying something that capitalism cannot really do well. And we even know why. We need this. We understand that we need social safety net in Czech Republic. This is not even a debate. So why not think of doing something for the whole globe? So this, if you want to go a little bit in the future, artificial intelligence is an extremely interesting topic because human beings, it looks like, will no longer work in 40 years. So machines in the history have taken part of our muscle. That's what machines were for. Now they're taking part of our brain. Today, newspaper articles about sports are written by artificial intelligence, and you cannot tell the difference. Poems even, by the way. There are quite nice poems written by artificial intelligence, and they make wonderful sense. Well, they make as much sense as human poetry. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you go like, huh? So human beings, in classical economic terminology, human beings are consumption and production units. Human beings will cease to be production units, and we will only be desire units. What we will desire, and who will create these desires, I think will be, this goes back to your question, who creates these desires? Who tells you that you have to have a color TV? This is the second question that God asks mankind is, who told you? So a rich person will be a person who will be creating your desires. Not supply, but the desire creation, advertisement industry, for example. And the problem with desires is an extremely complicated one. So let me enlighten a little bit. I don't know how many of you have seen not Solaris, Stalker by Tarkovsky. You have 1, 2, 3. Okay, very briefly, there is this zone, a magic zone. If you get into it, it fulfills your desires. Huh? So there's this man, very rich man, travels the world, pays a lot of money, goes through a lot of danger, because his brother is terminally ill, and he wants to go to the zone to make this wish. So he makes it, he makes the wish, comes back, only to find out that on that day, his brother has died, and he has won $10 million in lottery. You get it. Was the zone treacherous? No, on the contrary. The zone wasn't playing these games that we play with each other. We can trick ourselves. So the problem was that this man desired to desire his brother to be well, but in fact he desired money. He didn't desire to desire money. He never said it openly in every questionnaire that he got. Yeah, my family first. Of course, I'm European, humanist, Christian, whatever. This is not even a thought. But deep down, this was his true desire. When I say romantic dinner, how many of you have a candlelight on the table? Every night. We have an idea of romantic dinner coming from movies. 200 years ago, every dinner was a candlelight dinner. You know. So our desires are not our own. They are created. They're manufactured by artists, by entertainment industry, by advertising, and whatnot. I think, when I was young, we used to make movies that looked like from real life. That was the home run of a movie, to be realistic. Today, we live lives so that they look like from a movie, it seems to me. Now, progress. Progress is an extremely interesting topic which relates wonderfully to growth. Of course, you can have progress without growth. Some industries can go down, like, mining, coal mining will probably go down. Other industries, artificial intelligence will go up. So but still you can have, in some, you can have zero. So you can have, of course, progress within industries. The question is progress in what area? And we have sort of fetishized the economic component of progress as the only progress that we understand. And again, going to my favorite, one of the favorite books, Lord of the Rings, I was once thinking to myself, let me try to estimate the GDP growth in Mordor. I'd say 28% annually. This going through heavy industrialization, deforestation, it must have been a lot of slaves. GDP in Mordor must have grown wonderfully. A lot of progress in Mordor. Unlike Rivendell, that's where, for those of you who don't know the basics of our culture, Rivendell is where elves live. And elves are known for not really producing anything. They inherit the sword that they get from their father, and they fight with it a couple of fights, and then they give it to their son. So they don't really produce no swords. So the GDP of Rivendell would be 0. Yet, of course, the stupid, obvious question is, where would you rather live? And of course, the answer is Mordor, right? The answer is Rivendell. Even though there was no progress, and there was a lot of progress in Mordor, one would want to live in Rivendell because it was stationary. Of course, GDP progress is a remnant of a religious belief. In the beginning, all the cultures believe that in the beginning there was a good time, and now we're falling further and further and further, and history deteriorates time. This changed, and we have sort of secularized the heaven on earth with economic progress or technical progress. This is why it's such a huge, even I would say religious disappointment when the economy doesn't grow. We sort of have these same self-blames. Another way how to maybe answer this question of ideology and progress is, for example, try to make this one experiment. Try to drink Coke and try to imagine that you're living in a medieval times. In other words, the only other taste that you know is milk, water, beer, and wine. That's the only taste that has ever entered your palate. For drinking? Okay. Honey water. And suddenly you drink Coke with fizzy bubbles, and how would it taste? My question is, of course, how would Coke taste without the ideology? Because when I'm drinking Coke, I'm also drinking a little bit of American pop culture. I'm also drinking a symbol of consumer society. I'm also drinking freshness and coolness. And did you know that Santa Claus had a green jacket? You know this? Yeah, okay. A lot of people don't know. It's. Oh, there you go. There you go. I thought you from the home of Santa Claus, and I've seen him personally wear the green jacket. So you also drink a little bit of freshness. You drink a little bit of youth. Interestingly, when you drink Coke, you are also drinking a little bit of blame, because you are trespassing against the culture of having a slim, eternal, youthful body. Zero, yeah, exactly. See, there we don't want growth, huh? Interestingly. That's actually a good, like everybody's buying Coke Zero. We should maybe think of everybody trying to buy capitalism Zero. Blame-free, fat-free. Because this is what happens when you isn't. Okay, let me answer in this way. In progress, it's natural to expect growth from a child, and when the child doesn't grow, something's terribly wrong. But when that child matures, you don't longer expect growth from it, and if you will insist, you will get growth, but not horizontal, but vertical. Yeah. So your progress will be sort of dwarfed 90 degrees. Yeah. So my question is, do we consider the economy in a childhood state then, if we expect it to grow? You only expect to grow things with which you are discontent. The engine of our progress is discontent. If we made discontent the engine of our growth, then fine, but we mustn't complain that we're not content, if you take my meaning. One or the other. Thank you very much.